This is Joseph Whittington, and this is video 1 of the skull. And this has a lot of parts. I'm going to try to fit them all in there. But first we're going to start with the skull cap. The frontal bone, this will be the frontal bone, which is kind of self-explanatory because it's the front of the skull, or the front of the skull cap. The parietal bones, there's 2, one on either side. The occipital bone, which is actually at the back of the skull. You can see it it attaches here. That would be the occipital bone back there. Next is the coronal suture, which is a suture that you can see right there. That's the coronal suture. Then we have the sagittal suture, which goes directly down the middle of the skull, and the lambdoid suture, which is at the back, like I showed you. Okay. Get Mr. Skeleton here. The temporal bone is this bone right here at the back of the skull. This is the temporal bone, the back lower portion of the skull, the temporal bone. Temporal bone, temporal, what in the world am I saying? Temporal bone, this is the temporal bone. Then we have the lambdoid suture, which, let me put his skull cap back on. Lambdoid suture is right here. This this separates the occipital bone from the parietal bones, and also from the temporal bones down here. Next, we have, turn it to the front. I'll show you a bunch of different bones. First is the nasal bone, which is, as you can probably imagine, right here, the nasal bone. Then we have the maxilla, which is the top where the teeth are, the top row of teeth. Above that, that's the maxilla. Then we have the mandible, which is the lower jaw, the mandible, the mandible. The mental foramen is this little hole right here. That's the mental foramen. Foramen pretty much means hole or gap, so the mental foramen's right here, because this is the mental, the chin is the mental. The zygomatic bone is the cheekbone right here. Zygomatic bone really forms the top of your face. You can feel it if you touch it there. That will be the zygomatic bone. The sphenoid bone, which forms the inner part of the eye and also the outside part. So you can kind of feel it up here, and if you could reach inside your eye, that would be the sphenoid bone up here. Next we have the ethmoid one, which is ethmoid bone, which is actually inside the nose. If you can see that little piece inside the nose, that's the ethmoid bone. Next we have the lacrimal bone, which is the inner part of the eye socket. The inner part of the eye socket is called the lacrimal bone. Next we have the supraorbital foramen, which is located up here above the eye. I don't think they really show it on this model, but it's up here above the eye. The infraorbital margin is down here in the inside part of the eye. Down here, the infraorbital margin. Then we have the superior orbital fissure, which is actually inside the eye socket. It's a fission of 2 bones, or the fusion of 2 bones. And then we have the infraorbital foramen, which is, I believe, shown on this model right here. That's the infraorbital foramen. Next we have the mandibular ramus, which I'll turn here. This is the mandibular ramus. And the mandibular condyle, I can actually unconnect, is right there. Mandibular condyle's right there. Now we're going to take a look at the eyes of the bones of the eye. Not necessarily the bones, but the parts of the eye. First is the optic canal, which you can't really see them very well on this, but the optic canal is one of the holes that the optic nerve goes through, actually in the back of the eye socket. Then we have the ethmoid bone, which I've already shown earlier, is actually one of the bones at the back of the eye socket. Superior orbital fissure, that hole in the back, the top hole, that's the superior orbital fissure. And then the inferior orbital fissure is actually the bottom hole in the back of the eye socket. The greater and lesser wing of the sphenoid bone is, again, one of the backbones of the eye socket. Can't really see it in this, but the greater's on top, or the greater's on the bottom, the lesser wing's on top. Now we have we won't really be able to see these, because in order to see these bones, you have to actually be able to see, like, medially. If you cut this in half, you'd be able to see these bones. But on the inside here, we have the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, which pretty much makes up the inside of your nose. The vomer, which is in here in the medial part of basically the nose and the upper jaw. The anterior nasal spine, which is right below your nose, right here, that would be the anterior nasal spine. And then the superior nasal concha and the medial nasal concha are right behind the top of your nose. Superior would be the top one, and the medial will be the bottom one. And those are basically two those are basically two bones that are in the back of your nose. Again, you're not going to really be able to see these due to this model, but I should have went to Walgreens and bought a bigger skull. But the inferior view of the skull would show us the palatine process of the maxillary bone and the horizontal plate of the palatine bone, which is basically the roof of your mouth. That bone does what that is. The foramen ovale is another foramen underneath. The foramen spinosum, the foramen magnum, the stylomastoid foramen, and the styloid process are all underneath. You could see from the inferior view of the skull. And finally, the jugular foramen, the posterior cranial fossa, and the internal auditory canal are all in here, as well as the frontal sinuses. We can see the sphenoid bones, the lesser and the greater wing, temporal bones, the squamous portion, and the petrous portion, and various others. And that is the human skull. Thank you.